It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and with us this morning is Dr. Brian Besong, here to talk about faith and reason, talking about philosophers that have converted to Catholicism. Thanks for being here, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle.
One of the things that you talk about in this book is how many philosophers are atheists. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something in the range of 70% of professional philosophers are self-declared atheists, and that's a staggering number in any field. I can only speculate what the actual reasons are, but I think one of the main causes of this is that philosophers are culturally pressured when they go through graduate school to be skeptical of commonly traditional views on many things, and atheism, I think, has a long history, at least a long recent history in philosophy. Most of the 20th century philosophy has trended towards atheistic materialism, and there are strong sociological pressures put on philosophers in graduate school and undergraduate to think along those lines. It hasn't always been the case. If you look at history, most philosophers have believed that God exists or have been theists, but in the 20th century, it's gone very strongly towards atheism.
And you also mentioned that that's not the case with religious philosophers. They're much more likely to believe in God. So do you think that's because the study of religious philosophy specifically draws people to the conclusion that God exists? Or could it just be that those that believe in God are more likely to be religious philosophers and atheists are less likely to be drawn to that particular field of study?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that you hit the nail on the head. You know, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
Here? And so I think people who are atheistic are going to tend to explain the so in the philosophy of religion, the area of philosophy most interested in arguments for and against God's existence, the rates roughly flip, where most of the philosophers, I forget the rates, but I'm going to say something like 60% of philosophers in that area are self-declared theists. And so why this massive shift? You could explain it by saying that people who are theistic go into philosophy of religion, they develop these arguments for God because they were already convinced God exists. That is an explanation. You could also say that people are being convinced that God exists once they begin to look very carefully at the arguments. My guess is there's going to be a little bit of both going on, but we really have no data to explain it. So, I think this is what good sociologists would look at to try to see, have there been changes in people's theistic outlook over the course of their philosophical development. I could speculate because I know that, in my personal experience, people who are working in this area, some of them are self-declared. They've been theists their whole lives. And then others, I think, do tend to be persuaded by arguments and have changed their minds. I mean, obviously, the volume that Jonathan Fuqua and I have just produced documents 11 philosophers and their stories of why they've converted. But I think this might be a broader trend.
That whole idea of changing your mind, the foreword talks about that concept of changing your mind and how it's not a very easy thing to do. Can you talk a little bit about that concept of changing your mind?
Yeah, well, in philosophy especially, you're developing a research agenda. The idea, for most professional philosophers, you want to start with your PhD, you work out a good concept, and the rest of your career, in many cases, is kind of putting forward the same idea in new arguments or expanding that idea in application to new areas. And so changing your mind in professional philosophy is possible. Famous philosophers have changed their mind, but it's not a common. One of the reasons why is because usually by the point someone's finished and begun as a professional philosopher, their ideas have been scrutinized very heavily, and they've considered arguments for and against their views pretty meticulously, commonly have gotten into arguments with other people, other graduate students on the topics. Mm-hmm. And so to change your mind then, it really it takes a little bit more than normal pressure, because you've already been subjected to pretty high-level pressures, and I think changing your mind is not uncommon, but it's pretty difficult, and usually it's only done by professional philosophers when the stakes are pretty high and the arguments are pretty strong.
Yeah. So this book, Faith and Reason, it's talking about these philosophers who converted to Catholicism. Are you seeing converts to other faiths as well, or is this something unique to Catholicism?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that you do have conversion stories. There's a similar volume that was published, I want to say about 10 years ago, by Rico Vitz, was one of the editors, and actually one of my former professors, Terence Cuneo, is a contributor to this volume, and it details conversions to Eastern Orthodoxy. But you get very few accounts of conversion to, say, evangelicalism. Most professional philosophers, anecdotally, in my experience, I believe, find contemporary evangelicalism shallow, and the mainstream Protestant denominations to be similarly shallow, liturgically shallow, historically shallow, and so they tend to gravitate towards the more historically authentic, you might say, liturgically rich perspectives on Christianity. And so I know that Eastern Orthodoxy has been a big draw for professional philosophers also. It's hard for me to gauge whether the numbers skew more towards Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, although I've been personally exposed to far more Catholic converts than to converts to Orthodoxy.
We're talking with Dr. Brian Besong, the editor of Faith and Reason, Philosophers Explain Their Turn to Catholicism. And how common is this conversion to Catholicism specifically? Do you have any idea on numbers or anything?
It's impossible for me to gauge it. You know, we assembled this volume, and I went to a conference, an American Catholic Philosophical Association conference, and I was telling my friends about this volume that Jonathan and I had begun working on. And it seemed like every friend I talked to said, "Oh, did you know so-and-so's also a convert?" Like, nope, didn't know that. So it would have been quite easy for us to, or it remains quite easy for us to assemble new volumes of equal length. And so, fortunately, the stories that we have are all very solid. We love the people and their contributions, and so it's not like we were kicking ourselves after we discovered, that new people were converts. But it does seem more common than you might otherwise believe. I think it's a hidden secret that many of these philosophers are, willing to change their mind on religious questions and have tended to be more traditional than maybe an ordinary layperson's perspective on academia tends to suggest that, academia is pretty liberal, pretty anti-traditional. Those are true things. At the same time, these conversions are happening, and I think given the academic mindset, it makes the conversions all that more interesting.
And you have such a variety in the book. Can you talk a little bit about some of the different backgrounds that the philosophers have prior to their conversions?
Yeah, I think most of the philosophers in the volume are Protestants before they become Catholic. But several of them are full-blown atheists. And so just to use one example, Edward Feser is the starting contribution, and he was Catholic, nominally Catholic as a young man, very young man, but by middle school and high school, he had stopped being Catholic and had become Protestant after hearing Protestant objections to Catholicism. Mm-hmm. And after that, he becomes an atheist, and he's an atheist up until his career begins, and he's an atheist for a while. Several of the essays are like that, where people are atheists in their professional training and in the beginning of their career, but most of them are some variety of Protestant, whether it be Episcopalian or Anglican or Baptist, Pentecostal. So you get a pretty broad variety of Protestant denominations represented.
Mm-hmm. And then what do they credit their conversion to? Is it uniform across the different people, or do they all have a different thing that convinced them?
Yeah, I think that there's different things, but with common themes. I think many conversion stories, whether it's academic philosophers or not, many people are drawn by the realization that the early church was Catholic. And so, reading about the early church fathers, I think features prominently in many of the essays. For the atheists, it's reading about the church fathers for an atheist wouldn't be that compelling. And so what, breaks that shell or opens that door to taking these things seriously, the common trend there was being or feeling absolutely convinced that a materialist perspective on the human person is flawed. And so I think that in the several essays that we have where they are atheists, it's first the person that opens the door to non-materialist explanations of the world, and then after that, they're more willing to think about God. And one of the common trends there, because not being Protestant, they want to survey all of the possible religious outlooks. The idea that there's a papacy that can continue to keep unity with theological integrity, that was big.
So can you give us just a little overview of some of the different people that you have in here and some of their stories?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Edward Feser is the first contributor. He's an atheist, and right now he's a very high-profile Thomistic philosopher, but he was an atheist as a professional philosopher to begin with. We also have Jay Budzwetsky, who's a philosopher at the University of Texas at Austin, and he too was an atheist, and he became Episcopalian before becoming Catholic. We have Brian Cutter, who's an early career philosopher at Notre Dame, also an atheist who begins to see the problems with the materialist view of the person. Neil Judish is a philosopher at the University of Oklahoma, and he was Calvinistic Presbyterian philosopher who began to see more and more problems with Calvinism. Peter Kreeft is a name that many lay Catholics are probably familiar with, and he gave us an essay detailing his conversion. Also, he was a Calvinist. He actually attended the same undergraduate institution I did, Calvin College. Logan Paul Gage is a professor at the Franciscan University of Steubenville, and he was a pastor's kid and of a Assemblies of God and later Baptist preacher. So he was Protestant in his background. Robert Coons is a professor at University of Texas at Austin also, and he was Lutheran, took his Lutheran views very seriously. And his conversion story was actually somewhat in circulation for a while. He was one of the more well-known converts.
People are going to have to check out the book for all of the details. Again, it's called Faith and Reason, Philosophers Explain Their Turn to Catholicism. Thank you so much, Dr. Brian Besong, for joining us today. Appreciate it.